Visual storytelling can feel overwhelming because there's so many ways to tell your story visually, like using frames or contrast or juxtaposition or colors, negative space, foreground, middle ground, background, or even characters. And there's so many ways, but there is one concept that brings all these different visual patterns together to help you shape the story of your photo. And that concept is context. And real quick, before we get into the video, while editing, I realized that this video got way too long, like over 30 minutes. So I split it into two parts. You're currently watching part 2, and I'll link part 1 in the description. So if I'm making any references in this video that you feel kind of misses a connection, I'm probably referencing something in part 1 of the video. So be sure to check that out as well. I just had to kind of cut it into two parts because it was way too long. So back to context. I want to give you one example before we look at example photos. That is from Austin Kleon's book, Show Your Work. The quote goes, "The cat sat on a mat is not a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat is a story." And I feel like this is very important because this is what context is about. Having just a sentence describing something may not be as interesting, but if you add context, you can not only describe one thing, you can also tell your viewer why it's interesting. So basically, if we translate that into photography terms, we need not just a subject like the cat, we also need supporting subjects like the dog, because the supporting subjects give us information that makes us curious or wonder, and also are the essential element that makes this story shape in our heads. So by adding context to your photos using supporting elements, you can shape the story of your subject. And these visual patterns I'm going to mention in this video help you create this context. And in part 1, I also mentioned 3 other visual patterns. So with that being said, enjoy the video. Okay, next up is negative space. And negative space is basically the empty area in your composition, so usually around your subject. And what it does is kind of give an emotional context, kind of similar to color, but in a much more ambiguous way. So this means negative space could add a feeling of isolation, but it could also add a feeling of freedom. If you see a bird in the sky, for example, like in the photo of the birds, there's a lot of negative space and it creates a feeling of freedom. But if you choose a different subject, it may feel more isolated than free, or it could also just feel very calm. So let's have a look at some examples to kind of show how this creates a context and how this kind of shapes our story. So in this first example, for me, this creates a rather calm feeling, but also a little bit of an isolated feeling. And that's because this boat is, yeah, in the middle of the sea. So this whole setting is a feeling that is something where you can't really escape. You can't just go out, or you can just leave the boat if you're on a sea. And this negative space kind of helps me kind of underline this idea. What this photo does is create a more isolated feeling because of the cooler colors. So depending on how you combine different visual patterns like negative space and colors, you can kind of shape the story of your photo. What negative space does is it gives your subject room to breathe, and it also can evoke certain emotions depending on how you portray your subject and what colors you use, for example. Okay, next up is this photo that is about a very serene morning by the lake. And you can see our subject is very small. It's this duck in the lower third. And for me, this photo doesn't feel as isolated as the ship. Although this duck is very small, this whole photo feels kind of calm, probably because of the colors that I'm using. So I have more warm colors in this photo, and that feels kind of, yeah, more calming, and also, yeah, it gives me a little more of a positive vibe. And what I just like about it is that this duck has a lot of space around it, because this kind of shows how vast this place is. So this helps us tell the story of, yeah, just how big the lake is, and also how calm it is, because if there were a lot of birds in the photo, it might feel a little more busy, basically. But the story of this photo is about a calm morning. So having a lot of negative space and not too much going on in the scene kind of helps me tell the story of this peaceful lake. Yeah, so basically using negative space, colors, and a single subject helps me tell the story of this very peaceful morning and a very serene lake. Okay, lastly, we have this photo of a young family again. And what I think is important in this photo is that the negative space here helps me kind of concentrate on my subject. But what it also does, it is kind of underline the idea of this photo, which is a young family visiting this temple and exploring the temple. Because especially if you look at the young girl, you can see she's running up the stairs. So she kind of may have felt excited to explore this place because especially for her, this place must have been huge. And this negative space around her gives her space to kind of explore. And that's basically the idea. That is the story of this photo, exploring this place that is huge. And the negative space basically kind of underlines this story because it gives her space to explore. And yeah, that's basically it. Okay, next up are layers. And what these do, okay, first up, layers are usually referred to as foreground, middle ground, or background. And what they do is they allow you to introduce supporting characters. So by introducing different elements in these different layers, you can add context to your photo. Yeah, you can add context to your photo, but let me show you what I mean. So in this photo, I decided to take these boats into the photo because they give way more context. For one, they make this photo more interesting because I feel like if I had just taken a photo of Mount Fuji, it would have been a nice photo, but there would have been no dimension to it because I wouldn't have a feeling of depth. So by having elements in the foreground, I can create a feeling of how far away this mountain is. And this in turn gives me a feeling of how big this mountain really is, because usually things further away are smaller. But by having something that is far away and still being huge, I can kind of underline the feeling of it being huge. But what these boards also do is create context about what is happening at this place, because these are, I'm not even sure. They may be fisher boats. Well, I'm fairly sure these are fisher boats because there were some people fishing on this in the sea. So what this does is just give you that information that these are fisher boats, and what is happening in this sea is that people are fishing, and that is way more of a story than just having a photo of Mount Fuji, because I'm not a fisher, but I imagine fishing with a view like this is, well, kind of amazing. So the whole idea is here is about not just taking a photo of this epic mountain, but taking a photo of what you can do at this mountain and also what people do at this mountain basically. Okay, another thing is in the middle ground is this bridge, because you can probably tell that this is a fairly large bridge. And by using elements that are relatable in size, like we know how big bridges are usually, by comparing these with our subject, we can again kind of create a feeling of size. So this mountain feels huge because we know this bridge looks very small and the mountain still looks huge. So by using different elements on different layers, we can kind of, yeah, again, shape the story of this mountain being huge and the type of people that are living by this lake, which then again kind of creates the story of, I wonder what it's like to be a fisherman by Mount Fuji, or well, I wonder what their life is like, or things like that. Okay, next up is this one, in which this foreground gives us a lot of context. So we can see that we're by the lake and our subject is this harbor. And by adding this ship on the right in the foreground, we can kind of create a story of maybe of departure, like entering this ship and departing from this place, or maybe even arriving, depending on how you see it. And by creating this kind of feeling, we create a story in our viewer's head, because you may wonder, where do I go if I take this ship? Or where did I come from when I just exited this ship? And the colors in this also kind of underline this feeling of a very serene feeling, because they're not as intense as the other sunset. And yeah, so this whole harbor kind of becomes more interesting And also, there's more of a story because it's not just about the harbor, but it's about a journey towards the harbor or even from the harbor to another place. That's left up to the viewer to decide and to interpret. But by using a foreground element like this ship, we kind of add context to this place and what the story is about. So it's not just about a harbor, it's about a journey and this harbor. Okay, so characters. Characters are a great way to tell a story because if we use human characters, or at least characters that are alive, like humans or animals, we can make the photo more relatable, but we can also use the expression of our characters to tell a story. And I'll show you in a minute what I mean, but I feel like characters are a unique way to use the expression of someone, not necessarily the facial expressions, because I rarely ever show faces in my photography, but just the expression of their body language to express a certain feeling. And by capturing this feeling, we can shape our story and also communicate our story in a way that is very relatable, because most of the time we are fairly good at reading certain expressions and certain body language. Okay, firstly, let's look at these two, because when I took this photo, I immediately noticed the difference between these two. It's fairly obvious. We have one person on the left who looks like a typical salaryman who, I don't know, maybe waiting to be picked up, or maybe he's been on a break, I don't know. But contrasting him with another character that looks vastly different was just super interesting for me, because if I just took a photo of this salaryman, it would have been just that, a photo of a salaryman. But by using a contrasting character, I was able to kind of juxtapose these two characters with each other, because I feel like they kind of express different ideas. And to be fair, this photo is not about portraying people in a way that is meant to be their reality. So this photo is not a way for me to say this person on the left leads a certain type of life or the person on the right leads a certain type of life. This is more about an idea that these two express for me, which is also why I usually don't show faces, because I don't want to portray these strangers, because this is street photography. So I don't know these people and I don't want to portray strangers in a way that may make them feel vulnerable. So basically, this guy on the left looks like he's working a corporate job. And feelings that I relate to this are usually fitting in most of the time. I mean, I do have a corporate job and I don't hate it. I really like it. I enjoy it. But there is a certain kind of feeling that comes with working a corporate job. And that's kind of trying to fit in or trying to fit into a certain system of working. And this person kind of feels that way for me. He's wearing a suit. His body language is like he looks like he's exhausted. And at times, jobs can feel exhausting. And on the other hand, we have this guy who doesn't look like he's working. He looks like he's in his free time. He looks like he's riding along the coast of Japan and living his life, which is a kind of romantic feeling and very contrasty. Now, again, I don't know if this person feels free or if he spends all his time riding along the Japanese coast and living life, having a ball. But by using these two characters, I can contrast this idea and kind of express this idea. And it's kind of ironic that I'm explaining this while saying that using contrasting characters or juxtaposing characters can help you express this idea without using words. But the idea of this video is explaining how we can use these techniques to tell a story. So I hope you can still follow me. Follow me. So anyway, yeah, this is basically the idea of it, contrasting these two ideas. And I felt like these two characters looked kind of unique. And by using them, yeah, I was able to kind of communicate this idea. And also, one important thing is that I decided to take this photo because I took a couple because they were really fascinating and I was really nerding out about the idea of contrasting these two. What I really like about this photo is that they are contrasting, but also they share some similarities. So for one, they each look in a different direction. So it feels like, okay, that's not a similarity. What am I saying? I've been recording for a long time, okay? So the similarity is that they are both looking at their photos. Yeah, photos. At their phones. They are both looking at their phones. So there's a kind of feeling that they are very different, but also they still share some similarities. And also, I decided to keep the horizon above these two because I felt like this is kind of the feeling of they are both living under the same sky, meaning that they may be looking very different and maybe they are even living different lives, but they still share this kind of same connection. They're both human. So, yeah, what I wanted to say is that the superficial interpretation is that they are very different and that they are expressing very different feelings that I have, like working a job. That's one thing, and I do really enjoy it. But this feeling of free time and spending vacation doing things I love is also a feeling I have. So there's kind of two conflicting feelings in me. But what I also do like is the balance that these two looking at their phones create because they are conflicting or contrasting, but they also kind of share similarities. So if you go on a deeper level, you could say that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover because they look very different, but also they're quite similar by, being under the same sky, looking at their phones, that stuff. So, yeah, so that's kind of a two-layered interpretation of this photo. Okay, next up are these three, which I captured very luckily. And what I really like is, for one, that they are, okay, more importantly, I do not condone taking a scooter on the street, but I do feel like this makes for a great photo because I feel like I captured a moment that expresses this youthful recklessness, basically, which is a feeling that, yeah, feels kind of romantic. Although I'm going to say you should never just take a scooter on the street. This is really reckless, but this captures the whole idea of it. And that the fact that these guys are jumping, yeah, it feels really free. It feels like as an adult, I would never do this. As a teenager, I probably wouldn't have because I was, yeah, I usually stuck to the rules. But I feel like, yeah, this is very contrasting with the feeling that I have as an adult. And also, we have this scooter driver. I'm not sure what what the term is for this guy on his scooter and the kids on their scooters. But this scooter driver in the back, he feels like an adult and he's on the opposite side of the street, basically. So it feels like they are kind of running towards each other and they are kind of contrasting again. And by having these characters that are very unique to this scene, I feel like this photo has much more of a story as it would have had when it would have just been a photo of the sunset. So yeah, by using these characters, I kind of used them as an anchor point and created a story around them by taking this photo. Or to be honest, the story made itself. I just captured it in this way. But it still kind of expresses the feeling of youthful recklessness and the contrast of feeling that I have with it as an adult when I say they shouldn't do this. And this character, this scooter driver in the back, kind of represents my feeling of this, being on the opposite side of these three. So, yeah, that's basically the idea. And I think this is it. Yeah, last slide for me. I don't have any more photos, but we have captured some of the most important elements, I feel like, of visual language outside of things like light, for example. But this is basically it. Okay, my computer's also making noises. I think it's time to wrap this up. So, yeah, basically, the idea here is to use these different visual patterns or characters to add context to your story. So, rather than taking photos of things, you can take photos about things like ideas or stories. And yeah, if you have any questions about any of these elements or anything, be sure to just leave me a comment. I'll get back to you. And other than that, I hope this video helps you create with more intention, and I'll see you next time.